Hello, my name is Mark Adam. I'm an embodiment coach, and one of my primary interests is the nature of skill, what skill is and how it can be developed. And I think this is a useful way to think about our lives, to think of our lives in terms of skill, and to understand that a lot of the things that we don't normally consider skills are actually skills, such as being able to say no effectively, being able to be calm under pressure, being a good listener, or even telling a joke. These are all examples of things that we might not normally think of as skills, but they are things that we've learned and we can learn to do better. So, what is a skill? So, the basic definition of a skill is something we do well that we've learned to do through experience and training. And a little bit more accurate definition is a skill is a repeatable ability. So somebody who can throw a basketball through a hoop consistently. If you do it just once, it's fluke, or you say you're lucky. But if you can do it when you want to pretty consistently, then that's a skill. And as we all know, skills are developed through practice. The person who can shoot the basketball through the hoop has spent time on the court doing it over and over and over again. So we know that skills develop through practice, but why is that so? What is the case? What makes repeating something make us better at it and make it something that we can call on when we need to? And there's an interesting underlying neurological mechanism to this that I didn't know about until I read Daniel Coyle's book, The Talent Code. It's a fascinating book. I highly recommend it. And when I've thought about learning in the past, I've largely thought in terms of neuroplasticity. And the way I understood neuroplasticity is that learning involves making new and novel neural connections. So when you learn to do something that you've never done before, your brain kind of has to fire in a way that's new to it. And this is true, but it's only half the story of neuroplasticity and of learning and of acquiring skill. Because so when you're learning to shoot a basketball through the hoop, you're trying all these different things, but then you get it so you get it right. Then the work changes not to be trying to find new neural connections, but to reinforce the connections that worked. So to be able to do that over and over again. So it's not about, at that point, it's not about, as I said, forming different neural connections. It's about learning to do the same neural connections over and over again. And the mechanism behind this is kind of interesting. Often when we think about the brain and the nervous system, we focus on neurons and neurotransmitters, but the thing that makes a skill is myelin. Myelin is the white tissue of our brains, whereas the neurons are the gray tissue. Now, if you're like me, you probably never really thought about myelin much. The only thing I really knew about myelin was that muscular sclerosis is caused by the degeneration of myelin. So myelin insulates our neurons so the electric signal propagates better. And when that breaks down, the electrical signal doesn't go all the way, it deteriorates along the way. And that's why people with MS start to lose their motor control, because the neurons don't fire properly. Their signal doesn't reach their intended target. So this thing about myelin is a fatty tissue in the brain, and its job is to help the neurons work better. So when neurons fire, over and over in a certain way, the brain goes, oh, this is important. And then myelin starts to grow. And each time myelin grows, that connection becomes stronger and faster. The electrical signals become stronger and faster. So repetition is what causes myelin to grow. And myelin's pretty indiscriminate. Myelin is at the basis of all skills, whether it's swinging a golf club or learning to play the piano. And so to go back to the idea about we want to reinforce a particular pattern. So if you're playing the piano, at first, you're really developing the new neural connections to make your fingers be a certain shape. But after a while, you want that shape of a C chord just to naturally happen so that you don't even have to think about it. That's what myelin does. Myelin reinforces the pattern so that your fingers go into the right position each time because it's reinforced that circuit. And we all know the story about, or the idea of, once you've learned to ride a bicycle, you kind of know it for life. You might be wobbly the first time you get on it if you haven't been for years, but once you've learned something, the myelin has grown that circuit and established that circuit in your brain. And that's what a skill is. And I'd never really thought about it in that terms, and it's actually helpful to understand this. So a couple things about this is first that practice is important, that practice, repetition is what stimulates the growth of myelin. So sometimes when people think about learning, they think about insight or a breakthrough, but this is not true for skill. So that might be, important for having a new understanding or things. But if you're talking about developing a skill, you're talking about actually growing neural structures in your brain so that something becomes established. So this takes time. There's not a sudden breakthrough or insight that creates a skill. Skills are developed by consistent work over time. Now, there's the old saying, practice makes perfect, and this isn't actually accurate. It would be more accurate to say practice makes perfect, because when you practice something over and over again, that gets reinforced. So there's people who've had bad form when they've started to learn piano, and that's trained their muscles in a way that's actually limited their further development, and they've had to go back, and actually it's been more difficult because they have to retrain their muscles. So I don't want to scare you with that, because when we learn, when we learn attentively, there's kind of a self-correcting mechanism. Somebody goes out and shoots their basketball over and over again, and pays attention, there's a self-correcting mechanism. But if you go into something more deeply like piano or playing the violin, having good form and being consistent with that is what will make for good skill. And with practice, 10 minutes of intentional, focused, conscious, aware practice is much better than an hour of sloppy practice, because we want to fire the signals in the way we want to be reinforced. Um, Another thing I want to say about this with myelin, often people think there's another saying, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. And too many people think that as you age, you can no longer learn. And it's true that children learn better than adults. Uh, they have more neural activity and they produce more myelin. But we keep producing myelin all our lives. So you can keep learning as you age and as you grow, but the fact is it will take you more effort. You will have to do more repetitions to grow the same amount of myelin as a younger person can do it in less time. So to go back to the idea about learning to ride a bicycle, once you've learned it. This is true with bad habits. Myelin doesn't go away once we've grown it. So if we've had a bad habit, the only way to kind of reinforce a new habit is to make that connection stronger than the old habit. So it takes time. So any change takes time. So this is kind of the bad news, and the good news is that there's the ability to learn new things, to establish new skills and habits, but it takes time and effort. And just to go back to the aging, you can do things that can support your myelin as you're older. You can make sure you get your fatty acids, your omega-3s, your vitamin B12 and D3. This all helps support your ability to produce myelin. So I hope this has given you something to think about. As I said, I'd never thought about myelin in terms of developing skill. I'd never really thought about myelin at all. But just that understanding that a skill is reinforcing particular wanted neural pathways. So I hope you found this interesting and useful and helpful. And thank you.